Welcome back to my channel. So today is another tutorial and we are going right back to decor. I'm going to show you how I made these fall leaf coasters. Super simple, super easy, and of course everything's in the description box. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so first things first, we're going to be using these tiles from Lowe's. This is actually the first way I learned how to make coasters instead of using like a full mold and doing epoxy coasters. But these are actually tiles from the hardware store, and we're going to give these a nice scuffed up surface. So I'm going to use a little bit of sanding on top of this just to scuff it up. I am going to paint these with a flat white spray paint, and the reason for that is because I'm going to be applying alcohol ink, and on this super smooth and slippery surface I won't really be able to get the alcohol ink to stick the way I want it to, so I'm going to apply a layer of that flat spray paint in order to be able to do my wood grain on top of this. So clean those off after you've sanded them a little 91% alcohol, and then take them outside and get them spray painted with a flat white spray paint. With my tiles slash coasters now dry, I'm going to add some alcohol ink. So I'm going to do a wood grain here. And so wood grain, like I've explained before, is just using a brown alcohol ink of your choice, adding a couple lines of your alcohol ink on top of the surface that you're going to be creating the wood grain, and then using a dry chip brush to brush the ink back and forth. That's going to give you that beautiful wood grain texture that you're going for. So again, this does not need to be perfect. We're actually going to create a peekaboo out of these, and if you're someone who's struggling like me to get these to stay in one spot, you may want to hold them or maybe adhere them to the paper with a piece of tape or something to keep them sort of stationary so they're not sliding all over the place. But I'm going to go ahead and finish up doing my wood grain here. You can use any alcohol ink that you choose. My favorite to use and my go-to is always Sepia from Tim Holtz. Just kind of my favorite brown to use for alcohol ink or for wood grains. I feel like it gives me the most true dark wood that I'm going for. But you can use any brown alcohol ink that you have on hand and get a beautiful looking wood grain look. So I'm going to finish this up, and then let's go ahead and we'll move on to the next step. So after I did alcohol ink, I did end up letting this sit overnight, and I'm going to tell you right now, I do recommend that you do a layer of UV resin over top of these. We're going to actually only use UV resin on this. I'm not using any epoxy whatsoever, just UV resin, but I definitely would recommend that you go in over your alcohol ink with a layer of resin for protection, and you're going to see why, because I ended up only with 2 coasters even though I started out with 4, and I'll kind of explain that as we get to that part. So what I did do is I went to Creative Fabrica and I grabbed a maple leaf SVG, and I just sized this to be about 3.5 inches wide, enough to fit on the coaster but to not take up the entire coaster edge to edge. And I cut the maple leaves out of stencil vinyl, and we're going to apply these right in the center of the cup, my goodness, right in the center of the coaster here. And we're actually going to be applying some glitter over top here. So something else that you can do, and I've mentioned it before, if you're someone who has a hard time finding your stencil after you have applied it, you can add a little bit of hot glue or maybe a little bit of crumpled up tape, which is also super helpful. That way you can be able to ensure that you can find your stencil later. So after I put the stencils on top of there, what I did was I took it outside and just used a brown spray paint that I had on hand. This is a brown that I will link down in the description box. It does not need to be this color, just whatever color is going to match and be a great base for your glitter color. So now I'm just taking a paintbrush and I am applying a bit of Mod Podge over top, and we're going to use a glitter called Pumpkin from Peachy Olive Glitters. It's this beautiful like brown, reddish brown and gold like chunky mix, and it really is just a really beautiful color, and I thought it would look perfect. It just really screams fall to me, and right now I am ready for the fall season. I love summer, don't get me wrong, but I'm definitely ready for that cooler weather, the crisp leaves, the nice cool breeze. I'm just ready for it. So this is really putting me in the mood. So I'm going to continue to add just again a thin layer of Mod Podge with my paintbrush there, and then put the glitter pumpkin over over top of all 4 coasters. After I've done that, I will let this sit for just a few minutes for the Mod Podge to almost dry but not completely before I remove the stencil. So let's go ahead and skip right to my boo-boo and how I ended up with 2 coasters instead of 4. Alright, so at this point my glitter has settled. I probably have waited maybe about 10, maybe 15 minutes before I'm going to go in and remove the stencils here. So I didn't use any sort of finder, if you will, to find my stencil. I was pretty sure it was large enough that I would be able to grab it, but this is what happened. So something that I knew could happen, but I was hopeful that wouldn't, is because I had such a thin layer of paint and then only a thin layer of wood grain and then the stencil over top, unfortunately what happened is that because I didn't have any barrier in between my wood grain and my stencil ended up being too sticky and pulling up the paint layer and wood grain layer beneath it. So that's why I had mentioned earlier in the tutorial that I would recommend, after you've done your wood grain and you've let it sit overnight, that you go in with a layer of UV resin to give yourself an added layer of protection so you don't end up like me and end up with only a couple coasters instead of a full set. So I'm going to begin to remove the stencil from the other coasters. I ended up running into an issue with only 2 of them, ironically, and not the other 2. I thought it was interesting that only 2 of them like removed the paint layer below it, but then 2 of them I was able to salvage. But you know, who knows? It happens. Crafting is not always perfect, and we know that there are always mistakes in the process, and it's definitely a learning curve and a learning opportunity for me to remember next time that I need to make sure to go in with that layer of epoxy or UV resin before trying to skip to the next step. So I'm just going to again remove the stencils that are underneath this glitter layer over top, and then I'm going to let these sit a little bit. So I'm going to let the Mod Podge completely dry and give that probably another 30-ish minutes. Not too much longer did I need to make sure that this was completely dry. And then I'll take them outside to add a layer of clear gloss spray paint over top to ensure that my glitter isn't going to move when we add the UV resin. So you want to make sure before you go in with your clear gloss spray paint that you do take a dry brush of some sort and brush off any of the excess glitter, anything that's not actually sticking to the glue. That way you don't have any issues with migrating glitter after you've sealed it with your clear gloss spray paint. So I'm going to take those outside, get them spray painted, and then we'll be coming right back in to get these sealed. Well, after I've sealed my glitter, I realized that I ended up with a couple of scratch marks from my weeding tool when I was removing the stencil. So I'm just going to take another brush and just a little bit more of that alcohol ink and just go right over top of those scratch marks to get those sort of repaired and look good as new. Let that dry for a little bit, and now we are ready to seal these. So this is what they look like before we're going to add UV resin. And of course, we're going to use the UV resin that I purchased from Amazon. You can use any UV resin of your choice. It is completely up to you, but I have let these sit long enough to make sure that everything is nice and dry and that I'm not going to have any sort of weird reaction with my UV resin and any of the products that I'm using. I'm going to add a real generous layer here over top of my coasters to ensure I get a nice even layer from edge to edge of my coaster. You can use your fingers or you can use a silicone tool like I'm using. I typically like to use a silicone tool for the first layer, and then you'll see that I go in after we've applied the other decals. You'll see that I'll end up using my fingers to make sure that I'm getting every crevice and every possible spot on the coaster to make sure that I have a full coverage of that final coat of UV resin. So take your time with this, no sense in rushing. I'm going to end up adding the UV resin to both coasters, and then I'll put them one at a time under my UV lamp. Again, this is a 168 watt lamp that I purchased off Amazon, and it has been amazing. It has been a complete godsend when it comes to using UV resin, and I no longer dislike UV resin as I once did. So I'm going to cure these under the lamp for about 120 seconds each, and that was more than enough time for it to be fully cured and hard to the touch. That way I can ensure that I have a nice hard surface to be able to work with while we're going ahead to add the final decals of the coasters. So I'm going to finish curing both of these coasters, make sure I have a nice generous coat and even coat of my UV resin, get them cured, and then we're going to move on to adding our final decals. Now that both of my coasters are hard and cured, we're going to add a little bit of some of this gold paint pen. So this is just an acrylic paint pen, and I'm just going to outline my leaf here. I could have done an offset of my original maple leaf, but I decided to just go ahead and do the gold paint pen. I just felt it would make more sense. That way I didn't have to add another layer of resin over top and then be able to go back and add my decal, which is going to say hello fall. So this kind of helped me skip that step, so to speak, because if I would have tried to do an offset with vinyl and then tried to layer another piece of vinyl on top, you'd be able to see the edges of the other vinyl underneath through that top layer of vinyl, which I didn't want. So I thought that the paint pen was definitely a great alternative, and it really does go really well with the glitter color as well, and it really just blends in and makes everything go together. So I'm just going to finish outlining the leaves here, and then I'll let it dry for just a few minutes. Paint pens really don't take too long for them to completely dry, and then I'll be able to add this cute Hello Fall decal that I grabbed from Creative Fabrica. So I cut this little decal from Creative Fabrica on some textured metallic Cricut vinyl. It's literally the only Cricut vinyl that I like, and it's in the gold textured vinyl, the gold color. And so we're gonna just use a piece of transfer tape to be able to apply these. And so I'm gonna put the Hello Fall right in the middle of the maple leaf, right over top of that wood grain section. I made sure to go back into Cricut Design Space and size it so that it was gonna fit almost entirely inside of the leaf. I was okay with a little bit of it going outside of the leaf, but I wanted to make sure that it wasn't like this huge decal over top so that you couldn't tell that there was a beautiful maple leaf underneath. So I'm just gonna add the decals over top, and then the last thing we're gonna do is we're going to get these sealed. So these are now ready for the final layer of UV resin. I'm going to go around the edges with just a 60 grit sanding block to knock off any sharp bits of glitter that may have not been covered by UV resin. And once I know I have a nice smooth surface there, I'm going to go ahead and get these sealed. So we're going to add another layer of UV resin, another generous coat of UV resin over top of these to make sure that they are completely sealed and that all of the glitter is covered and that I have a nice, beautiful, smooth surface to be able to work with. So again, just that thin layer, or that layer of UV resin over top. Then you're going to cure both of them for 120 seconds each. That seemed to be kind of the perfect timing for my UV resin, the one that I use, but obviously follow whatever your UV resin recommends, and then it will be done. Your coasters will be nice and smooth, and then we'll be able to just add the finishing touches here to the coasters. So again, just 120 seconds under the lamp. If you need to, you can add another layer of UV resin if you run into an issue where you end up with like fish eyes or divots in the top layer. You can always add another thin layer over top. You're going to just apply as many layers as you need to until your coaster is smooth. Be careful that when you're smoothing out your UV resin that you're not getting any along the edge of your coaster. You wouldn't want that to cure on the edge and then have to do a bunch of cleanup later. So I definitely recommend just taking your time and being careful. So we're going to get these cured, and then let's finish up with the final touches. So now that my coasters are cured, I'm just going to add a little bit of this like bronze colored paint to the edges. I just want to make sure that my edges kind of match the coaster aesthetic. I didn't want to leave them all kind of goopy and yucky looking on the edges, so we're just going to clean those up with a little bit of this paint here. I will mark or put this paint down in the description box with a link to it. I purchased it from Michael's, and then I just let that dry. I didn't seal it or anything like that. I didn't really feel the need to, but now we're going to finish up our coasters, and we're going to add these kind of cork board backings. So I purchased these squares from Amazon. I'll link them down in the description box. I purchased them forever ago because I used to make lots of coasters, and I'm just going to put these on the back of them. It's a perfect fit, and it's perfect because now when I take them inside to be able to use them in my home, I don't have to worry about the roughness of the tile underneath scratching any surfaces that I have in my home. So there you have it. There is your set of fall coasters. I really hope that you guys enjoyed today's tutorial. Of course, if you did, definitely be sure to give this video a huge thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And of course, I'll see you guys again soon. Bye!